Hi, families. It has been a while since I've made a video, so welcome to Math World. This video is going to be about fractions and strategies that we've learned for comparing fractions and finding equivalent fractions. So a couple of these strategies you may remember from third grade when your child was learning to compare fractions, when they started learning to compare fractions. So we are reviewing this strategy, so when our denominators are the same, this is the easiest type of fraction to compare. We just focus on the numerators and we are checking to see which fraction has more parts. So here we have 4/6 and 2/6, and so we know that 4/6 is greater than 2/6 because there are more parts. Our denominators are the same. And so here's another strategy that we are reviewing, or that we just reviewed in our previous unit, and that's comparing fractions with the same numerator. So here we have 2/3 and we have 2/8, and if we didn't have the model, then we would say, okay, our numerators are the same, so we're going to focus on the denominator, and we're going to think, well, the greater the denominator, the smaller the piece, because the more people I'm sharing with, the smaller my piece gets. And so the model helps solidify that point and helps us see it. So we are not always going to have models, especially in fourth grade on. So we do want to make sure that we are really using that thinking of the greater the denominator, the smaller the piece. Okay, and this is brand new in fourth grade when we use 1/2 as a benchmark fraction. So before, we have learned that we saw a pattern that fractions that are equivalent to 1/2, our numerators are half of the denominators. So your child should be able to give you several, many fractions that are equivalent to 1/2 because of that pattern. So for example, in class, I will give them a denominator of 10, and they know that the numerator is 5, and so 5/10 is equivalent to 1/2 because it follows that pattern. The numerator is half of the denominator. So over here, I'm going to bring this back to comparing fractions. We use 1/2 as a benchmark fraction, so it's really important to us. And we really used this strategy when we were playing our Fraction Detective Headbands game. And so we were trying to determine if our fraction that was on our head was less than 1/2 or greater than 1/2 or equivalent to 1/2. And so something that we ask ourselves is the numerator more than half of the denominator? So if I know that 4/8, my 4 is half of the denominator, and I have 5/8, well, is my numerator more than half of the denominator? So that would be yes, so I know I'm greater than 1/2. Is my numerator less than half of the denominator? So over here, 3/8, well, I know 4/8 is equivalent to 1/2, so 3/8 would make that less than 1/2, and I'm able to determine that because I have that benchmark fraction and that knowledge of fractions that are equivalent to 1/2. Something else we learned, this is our last strategy for comparing fractions, is focusing on these types of fractions, or trying to notice these types of fractions, which are fractions that are only one unit fraction away. And a unit fraction, as a reminder, is a fraction with a 1 in the numerator. So 2/3 is only 1/3 away from a whole, and 7/8 is only 1/8 away from a whole. And so I would think, go back to my thinking, the greater the denominator, the smaller the piece. So in this case, the greater the denominator, the smaller the piece to, or the smaller the jump to 1 whole. So I know that 7/8 is greater because it has a smaller piece or smaller jump to 1 whole. I'm going to bring it back over here to this side with equivalent fractions, and this is what we were talking about earlier about fractions equivalent to 1/2. That pattern that we notice is that the numerator is half of the denominator. So we've gotten this down pretty well. So if you want to have a little pop quiz for your kids, give them a denominator and see if they can find the numerator, and that way you can find many fractions that are equivalent to 1/2. We also noticed that equivalent fractions have a multiplication pattern. So again, if they are comparing fractions and they're trying to figure out if the fractions are equivalent, challenge them to find that multiplication pattern and explain that to you. And the last equivalent fractions that we learned about were mixed numbers and improper fractions. And we learned that an improper fraction is a fraction with a numerator that's greater than the denominator, which means that it is greater than 1 whole. And so in class, we learned to multiply the denominator and the whole number, and then add the numerator. So for example, here's our denominator of halves, so 2 times 3 is 6, plus this one part, this numerator 1, equals 7. and we know that our denominator stays the same because the number of pieces that my model is divided into stays the same. So those are some examples of what we learned in class for fractions and comparing fractions and equivalent fractions. Now here's some examples of the way that your child will see it. Mr. Bryant poured water into 3 1-gallon containers. He poured 4/5 of a gallon into the first, 4/8 of a gallon into the second, and 3/4 of a gallon into a third. So which comparison is true? So we notice that 2 of our fractions have the same numerator. So then we can use that thinking of the greater the denominator, the smaller the piece, because our numerators are the same, so we focused on our denominators. And then maybe your child would even be able to see, oh, 4/8, my numerator is half of the denominator, so this is equivalent to 1/2. So they are able to hopefully use that thinking. Over here, I noticed that 3/4 and 4/5 are both fractions that are only 1 unit fraction away from a whole. So if you look at our answer choices, I have 4/5 and I'm comparing it to 3/4, and this one is saying 3/4 is greater. Well, hopefully your child would say, no, we wouldn't choose that. We'd cross it out and toss it out, because the greater the denominator, the smaller the jump to one whole. So that means fifths are smaller pieces, so that means it's a smaller piece away from one whole. And then we have 3/4 is less than 4/8. So there's that pattern hopefully that your child is seeing, having that great number sense. 4/8, my numerator is half of the denominator, so that means it's equivalent to 1/2. 3/4 is less than 1/2. Well, that can't be true because I know that 2/4 and 4/8 are equivalent, so 3/4 is greater than 1/2, so we would cross that out and toss it out as well. Let's look at this one. 3/4 is less than 4/5. Both of these fractions are 1 unit fraction away, and we are looking at this guy because this is a smaller piece away from a whole. So that looks like a correct answer. Let's just double check the last one. My numerators are the same, so I focus on the denominator, and I think the greater the denominator, the smaller the piece. So the more pieces I cut it into, the smaller the piece I get. So 4/5 is less than 4/8. Nope, that's not true. So we cross that out and toss it out, and that's because this is only 1 unit fraction away from a whole, and this is equivalent to 1/2. So we cross it out and toss it out, and hopefully your child would say, yes, I know that 3/4 is less than 4/5 because 4/5 is only a smaller jump, a smaller piece away from one whole. Here's another one that you can have your child try. This one says Jake's art project is 1/6 complete, Penelope's is 3/8 complete, and Olivia's is 2/4 complete. So which comparison is true? So have your child try this one out and see if they can explain their thinking. As I'm looking at these comparisons, none of them have the same numerator nor the same denominator. So it's interesting. It'll be interesting to hear their thinking and their explanation. So good luck. Let me know how your kiddo does. Thanks so much for joining us.